Welcome to Binge-Worthy, writing a compelling story,
where we take a look at some of your favorite stories and we discuss what tricks, tips, and techniques make them bingeable.
I'm Jonathan, a published short story author and screenwriter who really enjoys writing TV pilots, several of which have been under consideration by production companies, and I love telling stories.
And I'm Jackie. I'm a story consultant and sensitivity reader for Jonathan's scripts as well as for other writers, and I love talking about stories and how they can help create inclusive spaces for others.
And we started Binge-Worthy because as I looked for ways of improving my craft, I noticed that many of the free resources out there on TV writing happen to discuss the same 2 or 3 episodes, and I wanted to create an alternative, one where we discuss episodes from what many people consider to be some of the greatest TV shows of all time.
We're committed to amplifying more than just the same traditional voices, so we'll be looking at a variety of TV shows, some of which you know and love,
and others you might not, but should consider checking out.
Since this is our first season, we thought that we should dedicate the entire season to discussing pilot episodes.
The first episode that sells a TV series and makes the audience want to watch more.
Each of our podcast episodes this season will cover a different element that a TV pilot should use to become a successful bingeable story.
Now, not all TV pilots need all of the things we'll be discussing this season, and some elements are significantly more important than others.
But having many of these elements present at once will definitely help to elevate any story to a higher level of writing.
Now that you know what makes us binge-worthy, let's talk about what makes a pilot binge-worthy. And one of those elements is crafting an engaging world for your characters to inhabit.
World building is fleshing out the setting of a story. While the term traditionally applies to fantasy settings, and we'll take a look at that at a future episode, the world building consists of creating a setting, atmosphere, and/or series of rules that have a role in shaping the plot or molding the characters, which can be true even in TV shows with mundane settings. So today, we'll be discussing the introduction of the setting of Only Murders in the Building.
As many of you know, Only Murders in the Building is a dramedy mystery series that has released 5 seasons on streaming already, with more in production. It's also a completely original series, not based on any source material.
So what we'll do now is we'll do a dramatic reading of the scene from the pilot that introduces the setting of Only Murders in the Building,
which we will be doing through fair use for the purposes of educating our audience.
And every time something stands out to one of us, we'll stop the reading and talk about it.
We'll focus on what makes the storytelling stand out as excellent, but sometimes we might discuss the differences between what's written in the pilot and what got filmed.
And then when we're done, we'll recap our takeaways.
Also, quick disclaimer, even though Jackie and I are devoted fans of Omit B, we might make some mistakes about the show's lore. But really, we're here to give our take on just this scene and what makes it compelling, and we'll do our best to avoid spoiling anything about the series that doesn't happen in the pilot.
And with that out of the way, let's get into it.
Now, for the purposes of orienting our audience, we'll try to break down the rules as follows. Jackie will be our narrator for the scenes. I will do my best to read as both Charles and Oliver, trying to make them sound as different as I can within my abilities. Jackie will be reading as Mabel, as well as any other characters that happen to come along the way. I think mostly that's going to be Tim and Cinda Canning. Also, we will start reading the script on page 7, which is right after the character introductions. Unlike previous episodes, we're not going to be starting from the very beginning of the pilot. The characters of Charles, Oliver, and Mabel have already been introduced at this point, but notably, the Arconia, which is the building that they live in, has only been mentioned in passing and briefly showed on screen just once. This is the first time the characters are actually interacting with the Arconia, and that's what we're here to look at.
Only Murders in the Building, pilot episode, True Crime, written by Steve Martin and John Hoffman. Exterior, the Arconia, continuous. Oliver enters place he calls home, the Arconia. Interior, Arconia lobby, moments later, Charles enters, clearly in a hurry, with a nod to Lester, the doorman. Charles spots Oliver, that guy, collecting a tall stack of packages off a mail cart managed by Ursula.
These are all research for new shows I'm developing. Some off. Stay out of the theater if you want a life, Ursula.
Charles pointedly slips past Oliver and over to the elevators where one is just opening. Yes, he steps. Interior Arconia elevator, lobby continuous, and hits 14. because there's no button for unlucky 13.
Hold that, please.
Shit. Charles repeat hits door close, but Oliver hops on.
Thanks, I have a thing that's... Yeah, me too.
Oliver manages, despite his boxes, to hit 10. As they wait, Oliver sees it's Charles through an opening in his boxes.
Oh, hello. Filming something today? I'm sorry. All the makeup. I just assumed... I'm not wearing makeup. Oh, okay. Me neither.
Charles hits door close, but the doors are stopped by the arm of Mabel, who steps in, beats, shades on, and hits 12. She slips to a back corner to scroll her phone, and they ride up in silence. Charles checks the time on his phone. 4:58.
It's not 5 yet, is it?
No. Seems they're all in a rush. As the elevator stops at 6... 6? Nobody hits 6. The doors open, and on steps Tim Kono. Late 20s, Asian, Wall Street vibe, holding a half-full plastic garbage bag. While in a call, he continues at full voice. Tim Kono. Yeah. Do you see anything you got in today's... Shoot, sorry. Charles and Oliver want to strangle him as the doors close.
Maybe we could pause right there. First of all, that was really engaging that we were able to read through all that, and it was still pretty solidly paced, that everyone was interacting.
Yeah.
I think there's something special about an elevator where it forces a lot of people who would normally not interact to be in the same confined space and still interact. And that, to me, is the epitome of what the Arconia does in the series as a whole, where there are all of these New Yorkers. The beginning pages of the script do flesh out that this is New York City. Everyone is very independent. Everyone's very head down, mind your own business kind of type. But in the Arconia, when you're in the elevator, you're forced into these weird social situations where, maybe you have to interact with someone that you normally would never talk to, especially if you're a New Yorker. And I think that's part of what makes this pilot work. I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that.
I just think for setting and world building, because so much of it has to do with the Arconia, it ends up not too dissimilar to what you said about the elevator, forcing folks to interact with people that they normally wouldn't. So Ursula, the lady that manages the packages, I'm actually not sure if we see her later in this pilot, but in the series, she's somebody that you'll come back and see, the doorman as well, Lester. So you end up having an easier way of introducing a lot of the people that they're interacting with in a way that seems more natural, because they all have to be at the building or there's a reason they're there. But yeah, I think so much of, I suppose, the pacing or who ends up having relationships or different things like that really are dictated by the building as one place. Just they all live there, but also New York City, a building in New York City is probably not going to have the same makeup or demographics as another city or small town or something like that, depending on where it is. So I think that also gives a natural way that you could have a pretty eclectic group kind of come together. And I think it makes for a much more interesting cast as well.
Yeah, it's a great point. Also, let's spend a minute to talk about the title. The title is Only Murders in the Building.
That's true.
And so one of the reasons that sold me, we were pitching a couple of ideas for what to do when talking about world building. And there's something about a show where if the setting is in the title, then that shows you how important it really is that you get that. And this was one of those shows where the more that I thought about it, it's called Only Murders in the Building. That's interesting. The title itself is, okay, not only are there murders going on, they happen exactly where you live. And so first of all, that establishes stakes, it establishes intrigue. But because you know that Steve Martin and Martin Short are in this, you know that it's a comedy to some extent. That's funny on top of that. And also, what's so special about this building that all this stuff is happening in it? And the fleshing out of everything that makes the Arconia tick is not something that happens over one episode or even one season. There are multiple seasons that unravel different layers of what makes the Arconia special. And we're just talking about the pilot. We're not getting into spoilers. But that's one of the things that made me really want to select this episode, where the Arconia feels like one of those places where even though there's no magic or sci-fi or any of the things that you would traditionally associate with world building, the building feels like a world unto itself. I kind of wanted to unpack how it got introduced to us, and this elevator scene is the very first taste that we get.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think I hadn't thought about how it being something that's not only in the title, but that, we're led to believe so much of the show will revolve around. It does add a specific layer of intrigue of how is this going to happen, right? It's a premise already that's using the setting and the world building to that effect. That's not a usual thing, nor I guess in most places I would hope that there's murders that regularly happen in your building, but it's something where you're intrigued to know how it's going to unfold or what's special about this building, that there's going to be all this happening. Keep going. Charles and Oliver want to strangle him as the doors close. You do? Okay, I don't know why this keeps happening. Well, this one is very important to me. Really? I can't get it sooner? Well, how early tomorrow? Finally, Tim gets off on 9. Silence. Oliver looks at Mabel.
Actually, let's go ahead and unpack this just a little bit more. So one of the interesting things about forcing people together is that you can introduce characters in ways like this that does not feel forced, right? This is a New York apartment building. Having a random guy get on an elevator and off an elevator isn't weird. Now, we said we wouldn't spoil anything beyond the pilot. We do learn later in the episode that Tim Kono, this guy who gets on and off the elevator, is actually the guy who is the very first murder victim that the show will want to investigate. And so this is a way on page, 8, of immediately introducing the murder victim in your mystery show, which is very important. In a mystery show, you need to know who the victim is and care about them in order to establish some kind of a rapport, so that way they're not just this faceless victim. They have to be somebody that the audience really cares about if you want to build a whole season off of the way that they pass away. Now, for procedurals where it's like a case of the week, you can get away with, oh, here's a dead body. We're going to try to solve this over the course of 1 hour. But if you want the mystery to last an entire season, you really have to want to know and care about who this person is. And so introducing them early is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. I also think that it being a specific social situation, like people standing in an elevator, I think that's a fairly relatable thing for the viewer, so it's already a bit of a shortcut in terms of what to expect, like people awkwardly standing there for the most part, or like how somebody conducts themselves in an elevator, I think also tells you a lot about the character just with the setting of where they are, right? So somebody that walks onto an elevator is already on the phone. That's, at least for social expectations that I've been around, that's a faux pas in terms of you're trying not to disturb people, you're in a very small enclosed space, and so having this conversation at regular volume, not really acknowledging anyone, like it's already setting up who this person is, or that this phone call and like they said, this package is so important. So I think then later when you do find out, like you said, that they're the first murder victim, it kind of adds a couple layers to it, because you have maybe an initial impression of this person, but also that they had at least no plans or inkling that was going to happen. They were making a plan for the next day, trying to get something, but there's also an urgency. So I think it just helps a lot with their mystery, just having this person kind of give us a bunch of different clues in a specific setting where we would be intrigued by it because they're in an elevator.
Also, going off of that, this is something that I didn't actually pick up before until you mentioned that. Going into the elevator, Oliver is carrying packages, and he just checked in with Ursula, the woman who's in charge of packages. And Tim Kono, he's talking about packages. So not only did our setting introduce us to the murder victim, he was talking about something that we already have a lead, Ursula, to talk to about the thing that he seemed to want plot the most. So not only did they introduce us to our murder victim, but also they introduced us to our first lead, and they did it all inside the building. And that is the power of how world building can be used to tighten your plot. And like just using your setting to not only introduce elements of your story, but also solve problems in your story as they come up.
Yeah, and it's a way that you can do it where it seems quite natural, right? Like walking into a building that has these services, getting a package, like all that stuff seems pretty mundane, but it ends up, like you said, being pretty significant. I also think that going back to getting some information about your characters because of how they're conducting themselves in a certain situation, like you get to see in the elevator just how the three main characters are either interacting or not interacting, a little bit about them. So Oliver can't help but talk to the nearest like living thing. So he's trying to force conversation. Neither of the other two are interested. But not only that, just from the beginning, Steve Martin's character was trying to not like ride in the elevator with someone because he was like repeatedly pushing that button to close the doors. So whether that's like specifically this neighbor, it's unclear. If it's just I don't like being around people, I'm a loner. It like starts giving you maybe that vibe. And then like Mabel, I think there's, because of the age difference, maybe there's also some expectations there, but just having headphones on, like I think they, at least in the pilot or how they filmed it, she also has like glasses, I think sunglasses on or something like that, like just very closed off, just here to just go up to my floor, obviously. But yeah, I think that's also another easy way of giving us more about character with the setting. It's just a very natural way. Keep going.
Yeah.
Finally, Tim gets off on 9. Silence. Oliver looks at Mabel.
Do you like your beats?
Mabel stares forward, unclear as to ignoring/not hearing.
I had a red pair. Loved them. But I left them on the train one ding.
Oliver turns to Charles. The doors open on the 10th floor.
Wow. Even the elevator wants that story to end.
Oliver gives Charles a pinched look as he heads off with his boxes. We see a tabby cat pass by on Oliver's floor just before the doors close on Mabel and a newly pleased Charles. Interior Charles' apartment, early evening moments later. Charles hurries in, checks his phone to find it's 5 o'clock. His new episode of All Is Not Okay in Oklahoma has just dropped. Charles' bachelor abode is dominated by a poster of himself in Brazos with a kitchen overlooking the Arconia courtyard. A bassoon is heard out his courtyard window, which Charles shuts for optimal listening. He hits play on his app, and we hear a podcast preamble from Cinda Canning, Deep NPR.
Let's pause right there. Another thing you can use world building for, particularly the setting part of world building, is to flesh out parts of your characters. So here we see Charles's home, and we learn a little bit about him. In the first couple of pages, we learn that Charles used to be this actor on this detective show called Brazos. And so we see a little bit of that as well in his apartment. And not only that, but we also see a framed poster of himself to show us that he has just a little bit of an ego about this character that's not really culturally relevant anymore. And also we hear that there is a bassoon playing out the courtyard window. And the fact that you can hear what's happening from other apartments shows that this building is a little bit more interconnected than things might seem. And that's another way that even though this is a New York City apartment building, they've structured things in a way where the characters can interact in these ways where you can look out your window and maybe see or hear someone else in another apartment, which actually goes back to Rear Window almost with Alfred Hitchcock. They don't really quite get to that level in the series of seeing someone get murdered through a window, but they kind of play with some similar tropes. I think that's an interesting dynamic to have. I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I was also thinking that part of this elevator interaction was Oliver mentioning 5 o'clock, and then it's brought to our attention again 5 o'clock, and it's tied to this podcast. It's not something I think on first watch I would have picked up on, but just having to have your characters be forced together like you are in an elevator, you might get some clues about I don't know, different things from the conversation. Yeah, part of me, I think, had I picked up on that, would be wondering, okay, what happens at 5 o'clock? I mean, I guess it's the end of the workday. It could be nothing, but it's also interesting that you have that opportunity to link those two things, even if it's pretty subtle. And yeah, I really do love, again, the setting is like where their homes are, right? So you get to have a pretty personal peek into just like, how do they live? Is it meticulous? Is it quirky? Things like that. So I think over the course of this episode, but also the broader show, you get a lot of information about people just because of where we're seeing them living their lives and the space they're inhabiting. So I think the setting, like you said, is very much almost like its own character and something that ends up being a part of the story, not just because it's literally the setting, but because of how they use the setting.
Yeah, it's a great point. Also, I want to talk about the All Is Not Okay in Oklahoma podcast. It's a little bit meta that we're talking about a podcast on a podcast.
Sure.
But the fact that the world is establishing that there is this property, All Is Not Okay in Oklahoma, and we're going to meet Cinda Canning in a minute, that is all a part of world building too. And as we're going to see, all of our main characters, Charles, Oliver, Mabel, they're really into this podcast. And so the fact that they have this shared cultural experience is really what world building is all about. So a lot of times in fantasy or sci-fi, these shared cultural experiences are created from whole cloth or invented. But here we have one that's created from whole cloth and invented in the normal mundane world. And that is one way that world building can be used in a completely mundane, unmagical setting to enrich the culture. And I'm using culture very broadly here. Perhaps pop culture would be a better term. You're creating this pop culture that is in universe that enhances what these characters are about. And it very much drives the plot. If they weren't into this podcast, A, they would likely never have become friends. And B, they would not likely take it upon themselves to start their own true crime podcast, which is what they do in the pilot. I'm not spoiling anything beyond the pilot here. And the seeds of that are planted in this scene right here. It all comes back to the world building.
Yeah, and I would say just a few pages in, right? We're not even that far into the script. Yeah, something that I was just remembering now was I think the first time that I watched the episode, this pilot, something that I was recalling was because this is a residential building, it has to do with housing. There's a lot of layers of things that you will start to think about oftentimes related to that, right? Like, where is the neighborhood? What is the socioeconomic status of the average person that lives there? What's the demographic makeup of your street? It's New York City, so I think often there's already that expectation that it's going to be pretty diverse in a lot of different ways, but seeing how fancy the building looked, at least to me, it looked pretty fancy, and that there's two older individuals there, one that was like maybe a TV star at one point, pretty recognized because of things that you see earlier in the pilot that we didn't read here. It makes me wonder, okay, there's two young people here. Are they loaded? Are they married to somebody that's loaded? Are they kids of someone that's loaded?
It did say that Tim Kono was a Wall Street type.
That's true, for sure. So even that's maybe different than setting because it's costuming and stuff. You definitely get a certain vibe. But again, I think just from knowing where folks are living and who their neighbors are, like that could potentially be a source of information. And that maybe this isn't a building that's just for, I don't know, older folks, or how mixed is it? I think just I'm a little bit of a nerd for that sort of stuff, but I think that it brings up a lot more information or a lot more things than maybe you would expect just from them being in a building. There's a lot that's tied to housing, neighborhoods, right? Even zip code and stuff. Using the Arconia as a setting also adds, I think, to the world building in that aspect.
Yeah, those are some great observations.
Keep going.
Yeah.
He hits play on his app, and we hear a podcast preamble from Cinda Canning, Deep NPR. You're listening to All Is Not Okay in Oklahoma from Cinda Canning. Charles pulls red and yellow peppers from his brown bag and puts them in his fridge, where we see more peppers and egg. Funding is provided by our sponsors, the Rand Corporation, the Milton and Miriam Swan Foundation for the Arts, and for dissolving the Federal Reserve. Charles trots to his living room, unfolds a map of Chickasha, Oklahoma. He's marked with key locations in the case. then positions himself on his couch, just so. And Trader Joe's. I think I'd like to pause here. I think a couple things. So again, we're in his apartment, so it is quite personal, but just seeing what he's doing while he's listening to this and little clues that we get, like he's taking out very specific items, but then you see that he already has a lot of those specific items in his fridge, like peppers and eggs. I think it gives me some information as a viewer of, okay, is this somebody that's pretty regimented? Are they eating the same thing every day? It gives you some clues, I think, about preferences or, I don't know, different choices like that. And then the fact that he goes and sits down, he's trotting over is what it says, so there's some amount of energy there that you see. But he's unfolding this really big map, so getting to see what he's doing in his own private time because he's at home and how into this thing he is. Again, just being able to be in someone's home, I think, gives you a lot of information about what their interests are, how into certain things they might be. If you have, I don't know, instruments everywhere, maybe this person's really into music, right? Just visually, there's a lot that you get from, that small interaction.
Yeah, absolutely. The fact that we see that Charles is very idiosyncratic when it comes to his habits is a way of using his apartment to characterize him, which is some very good writing. That is a plot thread that gets pulled on later. And also the fact that he has a map of Chickasha shows that he's really into this show. And it also does world building for All Is Not Okay in Oklahoma, where it's telling you that it's a... Did they actually even say that it was a true crime podcast yet?
Not yet, I don't believe.
So yeah, the fact that he has this kind of conspiracy map and that he's willing to put in the work to make that kind of gives you an idea of how into this program he is. And that's going to be really valuable in the show as a whole.
Yeah, for sure. And you definitely can get to do certain things like that in a way that's natural, like in his actual setting, like his home, versus, I don't know, showing up to a cafe and like putting out like all your maps and stuff. Like that's a very different vibe and message than seeing you do that in your home. And
they do get there eventually.
They do. Yeah, I guess for different reasons. But yeah, it also, like you said, makes me think of, how like idiosyncratic or exact is this character that he's like marking down like all these different details. But I was also just thinking like that I think also plays into it being a mystery, right? So the setting and kind of what he gets to do can also tie back to keeping you not just on track, but I guess doing little things that would be interesting to a mystery viewer. There's a map, there's locations, like things that kind of tie everything together. There's just a lot of things working, I think, on just one simple scene.
Yeah, we previously talked about genre on the podcast and how, like you said, certain tropes are expected. And so if mystery fans are watching a mystery show, they're going to expect a mystery. And so this is the first hint of mystery that we get, even though it doesn't pertain to the characters directly, it at least shows them engaging with the subject matter, which is leaving breadcrumbs to be like, hey, mystery fans, we see you.
Right.
Just hang in with us for a little bit longer.
There's like more coming. This is going to be introduced in a sec as a true crime podcast, so we'll soon find out in the pilot, right? It kind of has the connection of you're watching a mystery. It's set up as this is going to be about murders in this specific location, and we're having that, like you said, little bit of breadcrumbs of this character is literally listening to a thing about murders and plotting location and everything like that. So you're just seeing different themes just from him being in his apartment. Keep going.
Yeah.
Interior Oliver's apartment, living room. Same. Oliver runs around his old-school London meets Moulin Rouge place he shares with his bulldog, Winnie, setting up for similar immersion in that same podcast. With additional support from Royal Crown Cruises, the Royal Crown Prince of Dubai. Oliver links his laptop to Bose speakers by his baby Grand, sits in a lounger, lights up a fake fireplace with one remote, and uses another to adjust speaker volume. Here we go.
All right, a quick pause. So we saw Charles inside his apartment, and now we see Oliver inside his apartment, and that this guy is a very flamboyant kind of guy. And also, like, there's like a veneer of kind of fakeness to him, which becomes like a little bit more apparent as the season and like the series drags on. But the fact that he's lighting up a fake fireplace in a building as fancy as the Arconia just shows a lot about him without actually having to say anything about his character or have him say any line of dialogue.
Yeah. Like do you mean he's more interested in like the appearance of like fanciness and like lavishness, but not necessarily like the true thing.
That's him to a T.
Yeah. I also think it speaks to he's a play producer, a musical producer. I'm not sure how you would say that, but he's into theater, right? And so you very much see that. It's about putting on a show, not necessarily smoke and mirrors, but like this like bit of a fantasy, which maybe is like a little bit of what you're saying too. Like his place literally looks like talking about old school London, obviously like the West End or something is what I think of, and then meets Moulin Rouge, like I think that is an actual musical. It definitely was a movie musical.
I forget where the title comes from, if it's based on something else.
I only ended up watching the movie musical, so I think it's the name of where they perform, like the burlesque troupe or something like that. But anyway, you definitely get to see a lot. He has a little dog, right? I guess not so little, but that's something that we get to find out about. And I was also thinking just how they're listening to it is also very different, right? Oliver is lounging back. He's setting the ambiance or setting the scene with his fireplace and everything. He's already spoken about Beats headphones, and he has this wireless, this Bluetooth wirelessly connected Bose speaker. And that's a very different setup than Charles. So I would say Charles...
I missed that.
Yeah, Charles feels a little bit more what you would expect maybe for somebody his age, using things maybe a little bit more old school tech. But then you see that Oliver is wanting to be a little bit more hip or with the times or current. He's using fancier technology, and just how each of them are interacting with the podcast. Charles is literally studying all these things and being meticulous about it. And Oliver, because I think this also tells you about, if you know about the genre of podcast that true crime is, right? There's different people drawn to that for different reasons. For some people, it's the drama of it, right? The tale that you spin with the facts or like...
Ooh, that's very insightful.
Thank you. And I think Oliver is listening to it for the drama of the chase, what's going on, are they finding the clues? And then I think maybe Charles is going about it, I don't know, a little bit more
puzzle.
Like intellectually. Yeah, like a puzzle, exactly. Yeah, that's a perfect way of putting it, trying to figure that out. Yeah, again, all from just watching them interact with one podcast in their home. It's really cool how the setting allows them to do that, and the world building and character.
Awesome. Let's see how Mabel's listening to it.
Interior, Mabel's apartment, halls, rooms, bedroom, continuous. In a completely stripped bare apartment, Mabel listens to All Is Not Okay through her Beats as she heads through the expansive raw space to a bedroom where a chandelier hovers above a mattress on the floor. Baroness Margaret Backhouse, Fitzhume, and listeners like you. And now here's Cinda Canning with episode 6 of All Is Not Okay in Oklahoma. Okay, I know we didn't get very far, but I think this is a huge contrast, right, in terms of setting and the different apartments like we're talking about. I found this one to be like the more intriguing one, again, because I was wondering, okay, this is a young person, how do they fit into this place where there's like a past TV star also living there? And her setting is very different. From what I remember, it looks like they're renovating the space or something like that. And just the contrast, I love the contrast of a chandelier hovering over a mattress on the floor. Like, those are two very different vibes that I think the contrast, like, it's very visually interesting, but just brings up a lot of questions for me as a viewer. And again, I think the world building of, okay, like, her place is not as cozy as the other ones. What does this mean? What's the situation here? And this is a little bit about world building too, but for the podcast that they're listening to, I feel like there's so much comedy there. Just the fact that like these sponsors are going on for I think that they're up to maybe, 8 or 9 sponsors at this point. And it's like poking fun at like the NPR vibe and stuff like that. So I just think that's really funny. They're using that to that effect in addition to like world building. I don't know, this person's taking their true crime like really seriously.
Yeah, for sure. And going off of that, I will say that the whole chandelier hanging over the mattress thing, Reminds me of what we discussed in episode 1 about having unexpected things layered on top of each other and using that to create intrigue. And so I think that image kind of sticks in your mind and makes you ask questions like, ooh, I wonder what this is about. And importantly, it also answers some questions as to how someone that young can stay in a building that fancy without being as rich as an ex-TV star or a Wall Street exec or something like that.
Yeah, totally.
So now we're using world building to answer some questions. So that's another thing that we can do with world building.
Keep going.
Yeah.
Bluegrass tinged with some mystery plays as Mabel flops and focuses on the best part of her day, in Chickasha. Intercutting now, we watch our 3 lonely tenants get happily swept away to Oklahoma, where farm noises mix with the soothing voice of famed podcast narrator Cinda Canning. When Ray Butler walked me into the woods behind his barn that day in Chickasha, I was thinking more about his unorthodox clothing choice for farm living.
Let's cut there. Because we're already running a little bit long, the pilot actually cuts between a couple of different scenes that weren't really shown in the pilot. So instead of doing that, why don't you just read all of the Cinda Canning lines without any of the scene dressing?
Okay, sounds good. Oh, I did want to say one thing.
Oh, yeah.
Where I hadn't thought of this before, but the fact that we see everybody going home to an empty apartment or they're just like doing their own thing, which doesn't have to be special or interesting. It can be a very New York thing, I guess. But A, there aren't any roommates. B, there aren't any partners that we know of so far that at least are there currently. Again, somebody could be at work or whatever, so it doesn't necessarily have to mean that. But that is like an interesting point that they just showed. Keep going.
Yeah.
I was thinking more about his unorthodox clothing choice for farm living, and wasn't expecting to find anything related to the disappearance of his niece, Becky. But that all changed because of what was going on 50 yards deep in the thicket, where Ray's old lab, Bo, was digging at something in the dirt. Once he got his dug-up prize, intercut rapidly between all 3, all peaked, leaning forward. What the fuck is Bo digging up?
I'd like to go off of that real quick. It's important that the script is showing them all engaged with answering the mystery of this podcast. That does a lot of work right here, where in a few scenes it's going to establish that they are all going to bond over a mystery. And that's really what the audience wants to see. When you're clicking on this streaming content, you see all 3 of them. You know it's a mystery show, so like the audience really wants to see them together. And what better way is to have them bond over a mystery? So this is some really solid work that's being done by the writing here.
Yeah, for sure. Especially because it's not like anyone that they know of is like witnessing this, right? So you can be excited in the privacy of your own home, and you would assume it's not like they're pretending or anything. But it also made me think of when they go on later in the pilot to talk about starting an episode, like you don't think it's like more believable because you saw how excited they got, that they really like love this and they would probably all bond over this, like you were saying. So yeah, I think it even sells things later on. Keep going.
Yeah.
Once he got his dug-up prize, Bo ran proudly to me with it dangling in his mouth. It took a moment to absorb what it was. Then it became all too clear. Bo had found Interior Arconia Apartments, trio, back to present. Thwonk, thwonk, thwonk. Our 3 jolt. What the fuck? It's the building's fire alarm, loud and persistent, which also has cut off all main power in the building. Our intercut continues, as they all spring up, unable to hear their podcast now. In the dark, Mabel takes a moment, wondering what to do. Oliver puts Winnie in a rolling stroller tote, grabs his laptop and coat. Charles grabs up his map, phone, and coat and heads to the hall, where security lights strobe. Interior Arconia stairwell moments later. Charles heads down the stairs amid other tenants, and is bumped by someone heading up the stairs in a tie-dye hoodie, which blocks their face. Up? Why is someone going up? Confusing, but Charles continues down, all to that alarm.
I think we'll probably stop here. Okay. This importantly shows yet another way that everyone can interact. if something happens to the building, then everyone is affected. This is like showing how the building is a microcosm unto itself.
Sure.
If there's a fire, everyone's got to get out. If there's a blackout, everyone is in the dark. And so this shows the power of the setting and that the stakes are the same for everybody that's in the building. And it does it in one quick fire alarm. There's also one other thing I want to say is that just before they were able to reveal in the podcast, like what was in the dog's mouth, none of the characters got the answer. So that means that they all have like questions that they desperately need to answer. So it's like a nice little cliffhanger there in the podcast, interrupted by something exciting happening in real life. So you're layering unexpected things and cliffhangers, and it's all tied to setting and world building.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, that's something I hadn't noticed, where getting almost like that transition of the most interesting crime-related thing they have possibly been able to relate to is in the podcast, but now it's like being transferred to like real life in their building, and that's like where the action is happening now and where the mystery is going to be. Yeah, I think that is pretty elegant, like you said. I also thought it was interesting, like a fire alarm goes off, you don't know it's real, what do you grab? And that I think tells us a little bit about each of the characters as well.
Yeah.
Again, because of like just this moment in their setting that they have to respond to. And so honestly, I really liked that Oliver picked up Winnie, because I was like, oh, maybe he's not totally a dick. Like the first thing he went for was to grab like his pet.
Yeah, it was sweet.
Yeah. And so like, I think it sets him up as like, he's quirky and annoying. He does have like maybe a bit of a heart of gold at some point deep down. And yeah, Mabel just like not being sure like what to do, freezing, which is totally relatable. And yeah, Charles just scooping up like all of his conspiracy information.
Yeah, those are some great observations. So that's where we'll end our dramatic reading. And let's go over some of the things that world building was able to do in this selection of Only Murders in the Building. So we saw it introduce some characters. Now, when I say introduce, like the very minor characters, at least in the pilot of Ursula, Lester, but also importantly Tim Kono, because he was able to get into the elevator and we were able to introduce him very quickly, which was important because what other opportunity would we have had to be introduced to the victim? And also the building was able to give us a solid lead on how to follow up on Tim Kono, because he said that he was interested in a package, but we saw that Ursula was in charge of packages, so we already know who in the building we need to talk to, at least one. The world building established a common pop culture through All Is Not Okay in Oklahoma. That is not really tied to the building, but it allows three of our characters who do live in the building, who would normally never talk to each other, as is evidenced by the elevator, to share like a common bond, to have a reason to talk. And also the world building established that things can happen to the building that affect everybody alike, like fire alarms and power outages and things like that, which does come into play. And yeah, like all of these things are very important things that determine setting, culture, and also the rules of what can happen in this world.
Yeah, absolutely. I think also having all the characters interact with the same spaces and the same setting can allow you to characterize each of them very differently, or allow us to know, like, are there contrasts? Are these characters similar or not? We were talking about an elevator, like a space where there is some expectation of how people will conduct themselves, and in either subverting that or going with it tells us a little bit about the characters getting to see their personal space, right, and contrasting those across the different characters. Also starts giving us some information, but also leads to questions, like you said, rules of the world in this building. Who lives here? Is this accessible? I guess accessible in different ways, like economically or literally. And who finds themselves there? Like, do you have to be the Wall Street guy? Do you have to be an ex-TV star? And then, again, another situation where you have an expected way of responding, like a fire drill or fire alarm. And then if you see somebody subverting that, you start asking questions and get intrigued, like having somebody go upstairs when there's a fire alarm.
Yeah. Yeah, we didn't even talk about Tie-Dye Guy. but we're already running a little bit late. So yeah, that will wrap up our talk on world building for now. I feel like we probably should do an episode about fantasy world building or sci-fi world building.
Sure.
But I think that this introduced us to some concepts that we can build upon in a future discussion of this. So yeah, we hope that this episode was a helpful discussion of tricks that you could use to use world building when writing your pilot. And yeah, we hope that you find this useful.
We hope that these discussions can help writers of all walks to help diversify the media landscape even more.
I'm Jonathan.
I'm Jackie.
And thanks for tuning in, and take care, stay safe.